Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us and taking the time today to be a part of our Understanding Privileging webinar. Before we get started and before I turn things over to Jim, just wanted to go over a few notes to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So we anticipate today's webinar to be about 45 minutes with about 15 minutes or so at the end for Q&A. So to ensure that we have enough time to go over everything, we will be saving all of the questions until the end. But during the webinar, if you think of something, you have a question, go ahead and type it into the control panel on your GoToWebinar control panel box, and we will try to get to everyone's questions. If we happen to run out of time and we need additional clarification for anything, certainly contact us or we'll be in contact with you to follow up on all of those questions. Also, at the end of the webinar, we will be recording this presentation, so we'll have that available to you as well as handouts and a link for the quiz for all of you that are interested in receiving the 1.5 continuing education business credits for today's presentation. And again, you will see that email after the webinar, and the webinar recording links and handouts will also be available on our website and our webinar library. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jim. Jim.
Oh, thank you very much, Megan. I appreciate that. It's good to join all of you again. Actually, Megan and I are off-site. We are at the New England AAOP conference and seminar and at the Mohegan Sun in Uncasville, Connecticut. It's a gorgeous, beautiful day out here. Pretty cold, but we're very fortunate to be able to up here and we're speaking at this event. So thank you for letting us into your office for this webinar today. As I travel all over the country, and I know I've met most of you listening today, I travel extensively and I speak with O&P professionals, and I see that there's still a certain amount of people who find privileging confusing. So what we thought we'd do right now is take some time. This is a good time to review this topic of privileging. So let's take advantage of this time together and explain exactly what privileging is, who can do it, and the importance and how it should be done in the specific documentation that's required for compliance. So afterwards, we're going to have, as Megan said, plenty of time for Q&A. We'll address your questions, address your comments, and I hope you have plenty of them here. Hopefully, you'll get a lot of information as we discuss it here, but if you have any questions, please do not hesitate. So let's start with the basics. What is privileging? Now, the ABC scope of practice breaks the definition down into two categories. Number one, the supervision and privileging of a credentialed caregiver. And two, supervision and privileging of a non-credentialed caregiver. Okay, big difference there. Here's the big change that you probably are already aware of. We've been announcing this for about the last 14 months, and it's going to go into effect January 1st, 2019. Privileging of a non-credentialed caregiver will no longer be allowed. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit more coming up, not too far into the webinar here. So these are two very distinct definitions. Let's start with the first one, the privileging of a credentialed caregiver. I'm going to quote here. Privileging of a credentialed individual to provide services beyond their defined scope of practice must ensure appropriate, effective, ethical, safe delivery of patient care. Now, the credentialed caregiver may be privileged under indirect supervision to provide patient care beyond the scope of practice of the credentialed based on the written objective criteria. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. So here's some good news. The good news is that the supervision and privileging of a credentialed caregiver is not changing. It's not changing whatsoever. Indirect supervision does not require the supervising credentialed individual to be on site. However, they must be available for consultation throughout the process of the patient care process. Okay. Now, the patient care process is anytime the patient is actually receiving care by you or your staff. And we're talking about visual means. We're talking about live time. Okay. They have to be available by visual means and live time. So what acceptable ways could a supervisor be available? Now, whenever I ask this question around the country, inevitably, I have a practitioner who tells me that the supervisor must be physically available within a 60-mile radius. Generally, those practitioners who tell me that are either my age or a little bit older. See, I actually did a little bit of research in an ABC scope of practice from the early 1990s. The 60-mile radius was included, but that long has since been removed, and that's no longer the case itself, okay? The telephone, it's an option, as well as being in the office yet treating another patient, but available for any consultation and supervision that's needed. So once again, indirect supervision does not require the supervisor to be on site. However, they must be available for consultation and again, throughout the entire patient care process. So I mentioned a few slides ago, beginning January 1st, 2019, that's coming up very shortly, ABC scope of practice is going to change to just one category for privileging, and the changes include eliminating the practice of privileging of non-certified individuals to provide patient care. Now, in addition to that, a new category for support personnel was created. The ABC board believes that anyone who's independently providing direct patient care should have some formal education, some formal experience, and formal certification as well. Now, there wasn't a single event that occurred that precipitated this change. It came from ABC's core values and mission to assure the provision of safe and effective orthotic, prosthetic, and podorthic services. So in other words, to protect the individuals who receive care from ABC credential holders. That's the important part about that. Now, something important here also. The ABC board understands that busy practices need to use support staff to facilitate the work of the credentialed caregivers, okay? That's why we created that new designation and definition of support personnel. So with these changes, how can you still use your non-credentialed staff in assisting with patient care? Well, one of the answers is going to be the newly defined support personnel category. Now, an ABC credential holder, that would be the supervisor, may delegate certain tasks to a non-credentialed support personnel. Now, please remember that delegation is not privileging, all right? And of course, this task needs to be within the ABC credential holder, that supervisor's scope of practice. Now, for example, a certified prosthetist would not be delegating orthotic tasks to a support personnel. The support personnel definition states, an ABC credential holder may delegate certain tasks in the provision of any custom fabricated or custom fitted orthoses, prostheses, or podorthic device to a non-credentialed support personnel. Those delegated tasks must be within the ABC credential holder scope of practice, as I already mentioned there. These tasks must not include patient assessment, formulation of the treatment plan, final fitting, delivery, and any follow-up care that modifies the function of the device as originally prescribed. So any task delegated to support personnel must be supervised under direct supervision. As you can see, the support personnel cannot perform an initial patient assessment, cannot be delegated the task of the final fitting, and as I said before, the delivery of any prostheses, orthoses, or podorthic device. They also cannot modify a device in any way that changes its core function. So one example is trimming a solid ankle AFO back to a PLS design. They're not able to do that. So that does not mean that support personnel cannot make simple repairs and adjustments, though, okay? They're still able to do that. Now, for example, if a patient needs a strap reattached or some padding re-glued, these can be delegated to support personnel. They also can assist with patient assessments, like setting up an exam room for casting or measurements, recording measurements, right, and helping with documentation. And all the delegated actions must be done under the new definition of direct supervision. So I'm going to review direct supervision, what it can look like today. Now remember, these changes go into place in less than 2 months. So here's the major change of direct supervision. The supervisor must be physically on site while the care is being provided, physically on site while the care is being provided, and must be available for consultation throughout the entire patient care process. Okay? That's the big change for the direct supervision. So, an ABC credential holder may delegate certain tasks in the provision of any custom fabricated or custom fitted orthoses, prostheses, or podorthic device to a non-credentialed support personnel. I mentioned that before. Those delegated tasks must be within the ABC credentialed holder's scope of practice. I said that. So I just want to show you the list here. They can assist with the certified staff with implementing the patient treatment plan. They can record outcome measures and record vitals such as weight and height. The tasks cannot include patient assessment, formulation of a treatment plan, final fitting and delivery, and any of the follow-up care, any of the follow-up care that modifies the function of the device as originally prescribed, okay? Again, any task delegated to support personnel must be supervised under direct supervision. And of course, once again, that direct supervision, the person must be on site. Supervisor must be on site. So, and as always, the supervisor must review and documented record and is responsible for countersigning and dating those notes, and that must happen within 15 days. Throw a little note in here of my personal feelings. I think ABC is very generous with a 15-day period. I know practitioners who will not let a patient leave the office unless they review the notes themselves before the patient leaves. I know practitioners who are delegating tasks and privileging people, and they will not certify people, and they will not they will not leave the office that day until they have reviewed all of those charts. Okay, but ABC gives you 15 days to let that happen. Okay, personally, I think I'd get it done a little quicker than that. So just a thought. Of course, there are other options if you don't want to be a support personnel, or if you don't want to have your staff as a support personnel. We are not saying that every staff member needs to be certified and credentialed. We're not saying that. If you would like to do that, there are many options. So you can gain certification, and we're going to share a few of these examples for you. So what I would do is I would encourage anyone interested in clarification with ABC to go ahead and visit our website. And I'm going to give it to you at the end of the presentation, but it is abcop.org. And you can look at it after this webinar. You can see a list of all of the certifications and the disciplines that ABC offers by clicking on the individual certification tab itself. So if you are credentialed with ABC, and you wouldn't be a support personnel, okay? You just wouldn't be. Now, I've been asked to share with you some of the options for becoming an ABC credentialed and what that's required for those possibilities itself. So the type of certification that would be most relevant would depend on what type of patients the support personnel sees most commonly. That makes common sense. Now, so for example, let me use this. If a non-certified staff person has been involved with seeing a large number of diabetic patients for diabetic shoes or inserts, the Certified Therapeutic Shoe Fitter certification would make the most sense. Now, to become a certified therapeutic shoe fitter, you would need 250 hours of supervised fitting experience. That's basically 1 month, okay, 8 days a week from 1 month, a high school GED or college degree, and attend an ABC-approved therapeutic pre-certification education course, which is generally 2 days, often 1 day in person and then 1 day online. And then what you'll do is you'll complete your application. You sit for the 100-question, all multiple choice computer-based exam. ABC uses over 300 testing locations throughout the United States. So there should be one close to you with a very short drive. Most of the people will get up in the morning, have breakfast, drive to the exam center, the exam site, take the exam, and be home by lunch. So that's not an issue itself, okay? Another option would become a certified orthotic fitter. If a person's involved with seeing walk-in patients for prefabricated orthoses, then the orthotic fitter certification would probably make most sense. Now, for this credential, you need 1,000 hours of supervised orthotic fitting experience, once again, a high school GED or college degree, attend an ABC-approved pre-certification orthotic fitter education course. And that usually is 4 to 5 days. It's usually 32 hours of the course itself. Then you complete your application to ABC, and then you take the 150-question, all multiple choice computer-based exam. You get 4 choices for each question. One answer is correct. And you may also take this board exam at one of the 300 testing sites that I mentioned earlier. So let's keep on moving here. If the person and your staff member has been involved with and scheduled prosthetic patients or orthotic patients, they may want to look at the assistant certification program in either discipline. Still, another option, or maybe look at it in both disciplines. So for this certification, they're going to need, as you see here, 1,900 hours of supervised clinical experience in that one discipline, okay? A high school GED or college degree, and they're going to also need to complete 3 hours college courses of each: human anatomy, general fundamental physics, and medical terminology. Now, once you've completed these prerequisites, you can apply to ABC again and sit for the 165 multiple choice computer-based exam. Okay. Again, this exam will be offered at over the 300 testing sites. I will let you know that I know that NCOPE, the National Commission on Orthotic Prosthetic Education, their board of directors is considering moving the assistant program into having more standards, turning that into an associate degree as a prosthetic or orthotic or both assistant. So if you have anyone interested in being assistant, I would urge you to look into it earlier than later if they would like to go ahead and take the exam and get the prerequisites done prior to it becoming an assistant associate degree. So just a thought on that one there. And of course, there are also some of the other credential possibilities. You can also become a mastectomy fitter, a certified podorthist. These are both certifications. And once again, the specific for these are at abcop.org. And I ask you to go ahead and look at that at the end of the webinar. It would be rude to leave right now. So just a thought. So let's get back into the privileging itself. Let's talk about how you're able to privilege your credentialed staff, right, starting January 1st, to provide items and services that are beyond their scope of practice itself. Now, no matter who is being privileged, the process must be done by means of the written objective criteria. The written objective criteria is defined as the means by which a privileged caregiver's ability to provide specific patient care service has been assessed and documented. So don't worry, I'm going to make it a little bit easier to understand. And it's a common misconception about privileging is that it's a one-step process. Okay, that's basically the certified person gives permission to the privileged staff member to provide some specific service. Now, on the surface, this is somewhat accurate. It does not describe what needs to take place before the certified employee is granted permission to provide a specific service. So this is where the written objective criteria comes into play. And what we're talking about is the structure and mechanism of how the caregiver has gained the necessary knowledge and skills to be able to provide specific patient care. It must be clear and related to the diagnosis involved to the orthoses and prostheses being provided. So I want to break this down even a little more for you here. Now, the documentation that is required may take on different forms. Okay, that's perfectly fine, including, but it's not limited to, proof of completion of continuing education courses related to a specific diagnosis or device. How about documented in-house training or in-services that are specific to that patient care service that the caregiver is being privileged to provide, and or documented specific work experience participating in patient care activities. Again, these are just some of the examples. And if you have other documentation, that should be provided as well. That should be in the personnel file. So let's use this scenario as an example here. If you've been privileged to provide a custom PLS AFO to treat a dorsiflexion weakness in a stroke patient. Now, remember, dorsiflexion weakness in a stroke patient, that's a very specific diagnosis. That does not mean you're also privileged to provide an Arizona AFO for treatment for PTTD, posterior tibial tendon dysfunction. Okay? So what I'm saying is you are privileged for a very specific task, for a specific diagnosis, and for a specific device. Now, if you wish to be privileged in other tasks, you'll need that written objective criteria for that as well, and all the other documentation for that task that goes with that. So here are a few options for documentation here: certificate of attendance for training course, and this documentation with the rest would live in your personnel file of the person who is being privileged. Okay, it's not just simply a chart or a checklist that records which services the privileged staff member can provide. That checklist is okay as a record of what services the person can provide, but it does not describe why and how the person has gained the necessary knowledge and skills to be able to safely provide that service. So written objective criteria is the means by which a privileged caregiver's ability to provide a specific patient care service has been assessed and documented. Now, for example, if a person has been to a course that covers fitting knee orthosis, okay, proof of their attendance at the course would be part of the written objective criteria for them to be privileged and to provide that knee orthosis. So a log or a checkoff sheet is not adequate by itself. It's not. There needs to be other substantiating documentation that supports what is described in that log. So let's discuss some of the different pieces of information and documentation that should be in the written objective criteria. Okay, this is one thing that trips people up a lot, and we really need that documentation in there to be able to go ahead and privilege a credentialed staff member. Remember, this documentation is something that can continue to be added to. It can continue to grow. It's a living documentation. So here's what we need to see. Let's look at the content. What's the specific diagnosis being treated? What's the specific intervention being learned? Look at the format. Where did the learning take place? When did the learning take place? Who was the preceptor and which organization did he or she represent? Take a look at process. How did the privilege progress from observations to assistant to independence? And that's important. So here's a great example of living documentation for privileging. It is telling us the story of who, when, and what. And it's very specific to a diagnosis and device. Now, Joe's our friend. Joe is being privileged, and here is his story. It tells us what he's being privileged in, his training, who has done the training. It also tells us Joe's progression throughout his privileging process. Now, we'd also like to see the justification for needing a privileged team member. Okay, why did you make this as a supervisor? Why did you make the decision to privilege someone? Now, the decision can be because you may be doing something more extensive with another patient at the time. That's perfectly fine. And the person being privileged may be doing something not as extensive. Okay, but once again, all privileging must be specific to the type of item and service being provided. Now, for those sites, people you're listening here who are accredited with ABC, you have your business is accredited with ABC. We have some great resources in our accreditation resource pack, and if you haven't used these yet, I strongly urge you to please take a look at them. They're there for you. They're all at your fingertips. These are available on our website, abcop.org, as I mentioned before. You just log in under your accreditation username and password. That's your accreditation username and password, not your individual certified one. And after you click on the big red My ABC box on the main page, okay, up in the right-hand corner, the first is titled Instruction for Using Privileging Criteria Template. All right. And the second is an actual privileging criteria template itself. Now, keep in mind, these resources will be changing at the end of 2018 to reflect the changes we've talked about that are coming in January. So if you're using them now, and you're going to download them now, what I would suggest is make sure you get the updated versions at the beginning of the new year, okay? Because these will be changed for the beginning of the new year. And again, now that you have sufficient written objective criteria, you have all the documentation to privilege a staff member. Okay, I want to remind you that the credentialed supervisor, the supervisor of what their responsibilities are. Now, first of all, again, reminding you, you must review all the notes written in the patient's chart by privileging team member. Okay, review those notes. Second, go ahead and co-sign those notes. And thirdly, you must go ahead and date them. I want to emphasize the reason for the supervisor to review, co-sign, and date the notes, because the supervisor is basically saying, I agree with this action. This is what I would do, and I agree with this. This comes under your certification as the supervisor. Remember, any care you privilege someone else to provide is ultimately your responsibility. The buck stops here. So make sure you keep that in mind. It's a very serious situation and very important. One as a reminder, I want to take a look at some of the do's and some of the don'ts when you're privileging and some of the things we've been discussing itself. So do make sure you have sufficient documentation needed for privileging, training, justification, that written objective criteria. Make sure you have that. Do continue to be educated to keep up with the new procedures, the technology, the standards. Now, being privileged follows along the same line with your ABC certification. So you need to reach your CEU minimum goals, right? Your continuing education units and your continuing education credit goals every 5 years, right? So continue to update your privileged staff members' education as well. That's extremely important. If they're going to be privileged, make sure their continuing education happens. Do be available for supervision and consultation with a credentialed caregiver, right? And the non-credentialed caregiver at this point, okay? And we want to make sure that's visual means and live time. Remember, co-sign, date the privileged staff members' notes, review them, right? Do that within the 15-day period, but preferably earlier. And remember that if your facility is accredited with ABC, the ABC surveyor, when they come to do your accreditation survey, is going to review all of the privileging documentation during your next and following and all of your following ABC accreditation surveys. If they see privileging done at your facility, they're going to say, I'd like to see the personnel file of the person who's being privileged, and they're going to look for that documentation in there. So I just want to give you fair warning, that certainly will be done. Let's look at the don'ts. Don't become comfortable with your privileged staff member and the services they're providing. Don't become comfortable with that. Be aware of what they're doing and how they're doing it. As that supervisor, please stay on top of that. Once again, their work is basically your work because it's being provided under your certification, and you really should take that seriously. Now, we'd also like to share with you that if you don't feel comfortable, okay, or if you don't feel like you have sufficient documentation for privileging another credentialed employee, my advice is to hold off on it until you're confident that you have the appropriate required documentation, okay? I want to make sure that's important to you. Now, how do these changes affect residents? We're here at this meeting here, and there's university students at the meeting, and there are also residents at the meeting. So we've been asked this question, and this is just perfect timing. How do these changes, the privileging changes, affect residents? It's a real simple answer. It doesn't. It really doesn't. The changes to the privileging rules for non-credentialed staff does not impact the residents themselves. They have separate definition in their scope of practice, okay? And INCOPE has that with them too. So they are supervised by residency directors and the residency mentors as well. So it doesn't affect them. We also get the question about this. How about the candidates who will be soon taking the ABC board exams? Let's go ahead and take a look at them. Oops, pardon me. Didn't want to skip that so fast. So an exam candidate is anyone who successfully completed the INCOPE residency and O&P in either one of the disciplines and has applied to ABC for the board exams and that exam application has been accepted. Okay, so we've accepted their application. So if they've applied, right, and been accepted, then they can continue to provide orthotic or prosthetic services under indirect supervision. Again, indirect supervision is the supervisor needs to be available in real time, but does not need to be on site. So the exam candidate is able to continue to provide the services under indirect supervision, and that supervisor does not need to be on site. Of course, we still need to have all of that documentation that that person is prepared to do this work. Let's take a licensure. ABC accreditation standards recognize licensed O&P staff the same as certified staff. Okay, I get this question a good bit too. So a licensed practitioner is the same as a certified staff. Okay, an O&P licensed individual meets ABC staffing qualification requirements. Now, here are a few of the afterthoughts I thought that may help with everyone understanding what non-certified staff members may do. Okay, I think we have a pretty good grasp, and I hope you have a pretty good grasp on what certified and credentialed staff members may do as being privileged themselves, okay? But let's go back to the non-certified, the support staff, okay? Let's take an OTS, off the shelf. An off-the-shelf item can be dispensed without credentialed person having to provide the care. Now keep in mind, okay, they're able to do that off the shelf, but keep in mind that the documentation requirements are still in place, okay? We're talking about the patient's chart. For example, there has to be the prescription, a delivery receipt, the proof of providing instructions to the patient, etc. All those things that are normally done that you will do in the patient's chart, okay? That all needs to be there. Let me throw another example here with you. So any L code that is off the shelf in its descriptor does not require a credentialed person to provide the device. Okay, I want to make sure everyone understands that. Let me hit that one more time. Any L code that has the OTS, the off-the-shelf, and its descriptor does not require a credentialed person to provide the device. Okay, there's something that support staff can do. And at the same documentation required, just as I mentioned before, we still need the patient's chart. We still need to have the prescription, the delivery receipt, proof of providing instructions to the patient. All of that information must be in there. Okay. I think this is probably a good time to go ahead and take some of the questions that have been popping up. I saw a few of them coming up there. Megan, would you mind doing that? Would you like to ask the question itself?
Absolutely. So our first question is, are non-ABC credentialed holders able to delegate tasks to support personnel?
Okay, that's a great question. A say that again, please.
A non-ABC credential holder.
Okay, non-ABC credentialed holder. I'm assuming that would be a BOC credentialed holder. And the answer is yes. They're able to do that within the scope of practice, and ABC recognizes, of course, BOC practitioners and certified staff to be able to delegate tasks to support personnel.
What about, Jim, I was just thinking, what about like a physical therapist or someone in that kind of capacity?
Well, that's a good follow-up question, because what we are talking about is orthotics and prosthetics and podorthics. We are not talking about physical therapists. We're not talking about anyone, athletic trainers. That is beyond our scope. They are not involved with ABC. Whether we support those professions or not, they're not involved with ABC. So this is what I'm speaking at is specifically orthotics and prosthetics, O&P, period. Great question.
Okay, another question we have is they just wanted to verify that an orthotic fitter does not need to be credentialed with ABC as long as they're only dispensing off-the-shelf items. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, those were some of the examples we just used. So that's a great. I think that question was asked before I gave those examples. Yes, if it's off the shelf, they do not need to be certified. Okay, they can dispense that. That's not a problem at all. But I just want to throw a couple of thoughts in there. If the Medicare descriptor must have the code off the shelf, okay? That's extremely important. Make sure you double check that, okay? And also, I go back to what I mentioned, those last two examples. That does not change all of the documentation that needs to be in the patient's chart. For example, once again, that the prescription, we're talking about the delivery receipt, the proof of providing instructions to the patient of how to use and care for that device itself. So all of that still needs to be in there, but they do not need to be certified to go ahead and dispense that item if it's an off-the-shelf item and described that way by the Medicare standards.
Great. And just a follow up from that, Jim, is are they able to dispense those off-the-shelf items off-site, or does it have to be at a facility?
No, it doesn't have to be a facility. They can do that off-site. They can take it to a nursing home or a person's home or an office. That's quite all right to do that. They're already able to do that, and that will not change under ABC's scope of practice. So they are able to do that.
Great. Okay. So we do have another question. They're wanting to know if when we say assessment, does that actually include, and I'm assuming this is in regards to support personnel, does that include testing such as AMPROs and PAVITs?
Sure, AMPAP. AMPRO, we know that's an outcome device, and yes, by all means, they're able. The support personnel was able to do that. When we said assessing, we said setting up casting areas. We said about taking measurements and such like that. The AMPRO test that would fall under delegating for support personnel. That'd be perfectly fine. And the other one is a questionnaire that will be filled out by the patient itself with help by a staff member, and that staff member could be delegated support personnel. So by all means, that is something that they are able to do. Yes.
Okay, great. It looks like that's all the questions for today. I don't see anything else coming in.
Okay, well, thank you, Megan. Thank you, everyone else here. Let me throw a couple of things out here. I should have put this slide up there when we had the Q&A. Sorry about that. This is our website, abcop.org. If I would tell you this is our staff, I'd be lying. This is a really good looking picture. I would not be good enough to fit into that picture because I'm not near as handsome as those people. But this is our website, abcop.org. Everything we talked about today, you're able to find on our website. I mentioned the accreditation resource pack. If you're not taking advantage of that and you're accredited with ABC, please go on there and look at that. I mentioned a couple of things, a couple of charts. What it has right now, it has 19 charts, templates, information pages. And if you're accredited with ABC, they're just at your fingertips. You just log on and they're there. Some of them have to do with privileging, but some of them have to do with other compliance and compliance with the standards for accreditation. Take advantage of that. Please go ahead and take a look at that. This is contact information. This is my contact information. I'm Jim Lawson, Outreach Development Manager. If you have any questions, feel free to get to me, okay? jlawson@abcop.org. But we also put in here Steve Fletcher, and Steve Fletcher is a Director of Clinical Resources. Steve has been a practitioner for over 33 years. He's an LPO and a CPO. Steve can probably give you more specific answers than I can. I will get the information for you. Steve may be able to get the information for you right away. It may take me a little longer, but please feel free to contact either one of us, or once again, go to our website. This webinar will be on our library at abcop.org. The link will be on there. You can follow us, follow by email. We'll also be on ABC's YouTube channel. If you'd like to go ahead and share this webinar with other staff members so they can listen to it and then take the quiz, that would be great. You can get your CEUs for that. We'd appreciate that very much. Once again, I'm Jim Lawson with Megan Matovich here, and we appreciate everything you do, and we appreciate you being involved with ABC. We couldn't do anything without you guys. I hope you have a great holiday season, and look forward to seeing you all on the road.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.